Okay, I think we'll get started. You ready, Susan?
I'm ready to go.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our author talk with local author Susan Nairn. I'm Lindsay McFarlane, part-time library staff in Port Carling. Before we get started with the questions for Susan, we have a few housekeeping items to go through to make sure that everyone has the best experience that they can. As you would have noticed, Lorna and Jen, our tech support, have disabled all of your microphones and cameras. We'll be featuring Susan on camera for the majority of the evening, so you need to set your view in the Zoom view options to speaker view. Hopefully you're all familiar enough with this platform at the stage of this pandemic, but in case you're not, if you're joining us on a computer, it's up near the top right-hand side. Look for the word view and click on speaker view. If you're watching on a mobile device, you're going to need to swipe left or right through all of your viewing options until you get to the correct one. So while you're getting familiar with the Zoom options, please take note of the chat option, which is how you'll be able to communicate with us throughout tonight's event. If you have a question for Susan, please type it into the chat function and make sure that it's going to everyone, so that it can be collated by Lorna and presented to Susan at the end of the more formal interview section. We're hoping to have some time at the end for questions from the audience. We encourage you to ask your questions as you think of them. Susan may answer during her talk tonight, but don't worry about waiting until the end to type in what you would like to know. Just pop it in the chat box. We are recording tonight's talk so that it can be linked onto our website and enjoyed by those who couldn't make it. We do have our other author talks available for watching anytime if you're interested. The District of Muskoka Libraries have hosted both Emma Donoghue and Jennifer Robson, with more author nights to come. Lorna has already provided you all with a link in the chat to our past events, as well as to Susan's blog. If you're unfamiliar with that, you can have a look at it after the event. The Muskoka Lakes Public Library feels it is imperative to acknowledge that these lands and waters are the traditional homeland of the Ojibwe Nation and the Huron-Wendat Nation, and now includes communities from the Mohawk Nation and the Métis Nation of Ontario. We acknowledge their stewardship throughout the ages. As I think you all know, joining us tonight is local author Susan M. Nairn. Susan lives in a quaint town in the heart of Muskoka, Ontario. Her passion for words began as a child, and her love of writing poems turned into short stories and eventually into writing novels. The Waking Hours is the first in the Relative series. She recently finished writing the second book in the series, 111, and is currently writing the third in the series called Dark Room, while madly documenting ideas for the following 3 books in the series, Root Cellar, Gemini, and Abbey in the Oakwood. Welcome, Susan. Congratulations on the Waking Hours.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here and appreciate everybody's attendance. This is quite fun.
Great. Well, let's just start off. While doing some research for tonight's talk, I revisited your blog, Polysyllabic Profundities, which you have been contributing to since August 2012, nearly a decade of being an online presence. Obviously, you've been writing for a long time. How long have you considered yourself a writer with a capital W?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've been on a lot of social media lately and joining writing groups and getting more familiar with people in the same boat that I'm in. And the word writer has always been a part of who I am. And I think for me, getting beyond the writer and being able to call myself an author didn't happen until I self-published. And it's not a disconnect, but it's hard to compartmentalize writing, because anybody, that writes anything is a writer. But for me, the big change was getting my book out into the public and seeing that page on Amazon that had my book title, my name beside it. And right now it's got 56 reviews that are all great. And that really took me from being the writer to being an author.
Well, I can't imagine what that would feel like, actually, to go on to Amazon and your book's there. So that's huge.
It's a really strange feeling. And I for the first few days, I think I was on Amazon more than I was on any other social media, just checking the stats and checking the book sales. And, it is a kind of strange feeling to think that I've produced this work that people are buying and enjoying. So that's a big step for me.
I bet. I feel a little bit of ownership too, just knowing that you're from the same town, and I kind of claim a piece of you for that. So congrats for.
Thank you. I think I'm the smallest, yeah, the smallest small town celebrity ever, because I'm like, when I walk into Foodland, everyone's like, "Oh, I read your book. It's really great." So it's kind of funny. I mean, it's a great start. It's a good feeling, and people have been so supportive, especially in Port Carling and surrounding areas. So I couldn't have asked for a better starting spot.
Well, I'm sure that everybody who's tuned in tonight is wondering, how do you actually write? Do you have an established writing process? Do you use a keyboard? Is it pen and paper? Do you have a specific room, maybe you're sitting in it tonight, that you do all your writing in, or do you write wherever the mood strikes? Do you have a set numbers of words or days in a week that you treat it as your job? What's your process to getting it all down?
Yeah, I do. I'm actually in my writing room, which is my living room. It's 9 by 14, so it's the smallest writing room ever. But yeah, I every day I have time that I set aside to try and write. I do have a word goal. I have a friend of mine who has become my mentor, and we have weekly meetings on Zoom. So he gives me a word count. He'll say, "Oh, I think you should be 8,000 words by next Monday," and it's a great thing to start out with, but there are times that I have days where I can't write anything, and suddenly I'm faced with, I have to have 8,000 words written in 3 days. And suddenly the words come. So I've been short a couple of weeks, I've been over a couple of weeks, but I always make the time to write. There's usually one day that I give to myself to not write, because I don't want it to feel overwhelming and have it become a job. Which, I mean, technically it could be, but it's always, I need to have me time, and I need to set aside that day that I don't feel pressured to put words on a page if they're not coming. And if that day happens to be the day that my brain's saying, "Hey, I've got 500 words that I want to put on paper," then I will sit down and write. But I do have to step back and give myself time just to have a day where I don't need to write.
So that the writing stays joyful, no doubt. You don't want
Yeah.
to, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, I'm very character driven when I write. So I don't outline, I don't plot. So if a character, if I'm outside feeding my birds and a character saying, "Hey, I want to talk to you for a minute," then I'm going to come back inside and write, because that's the voice that I need to write. It's not me just putting words down on a page. It's me listening to the people that I've created saying, "Okay, well, this is where we're going with this." And I have to sit down and write it.
So that's really interesting to me. Can you tell me a bit more about the voices in your head? You obviously expand on them once you've met them, but to start the book, did you have any of these voices already in your head from the waking hours? Was there one that started the whole thing off, or what, when you said that they're speaking to you, what does that mean?
I think, I mean, it's so funny, because the idea for the waking hours came to me 20 years ago, and I wrote 3 chapters, and it sat for 15 years and collected dust. And I don't know what it was that compelled me to pick it up again, but maybe it was Jack's voice saying, "Hey, I'm ready to tell the rest of my story." And it just went from there. And there are times when I will think I'm going to write in a certain direction, and the story's going to go a certain way, and the characters in my head saying, "No, that's not what happens." So for me, it's interesting, because there are moments when I'm writing that I lose time, and it's like being in a writing fugue. And when I come out of it, it could be an hour, it could be 10 minutes. I think, "Oh, okay, I'm in my house and I'm looking around, and I've resettled and resituated, but now I have all these words written that didn't really come from me." So it's hard to explain. I mean, it's when you tell people you hear voices, if you're a writer, it's one thing, and it's great. So I'm happy to tell people I hear voices now, and admit it, because that's where the ideas come from.
And the flip side of being so productive with all your writing and your friend challenging you with the word count is writer's block. Do you ever experience that?
I experienced that this morning. Yes, I do experience that. And it's extremely frustrating because there are days that Monday, for example, is my meetings my Zoom meetings with Neil. So I sit down and write in the morning and try and get to my word count. And if I'm not there, I know I've got Monday afternoon to meet it. And Monday I wrote 3,500 words and it was fantastic. I mean, it was just pouring out of me. And this morning I thought, oh, I've got this full day. I don't have my Zoom meeting till 7:30. I'm going to write all day long. It's going to be so productive. And I wrote 50 words between 7:30 in the morning and 1:30 in the afternoon. And it was just like there was nothing in my head. And I had to go out and run some errands. And I came back in the span of 2:30 to 6:30, wrote 1,100 words. So you just can't tell when it's going to come and when it's not.
I guess you just have to trust the process that you'll get through it again.
Yeah, and it does come eventually. It's just you can't beat yourself up that, the words aren't coming because it's not me writing them. And if they're, the characters are not willing to tell their story. And I know it sounds strange, but I've talked to so many other people who are writing books as well, who have the exact same experience. It's not coming from them. It's this voice that's sending itself through you to tell their story. So I just have to wait until they're ready to talk to me.
Now, do you edit as you go? I know that I've heard of various processes for different authors. Some edit as they go, some absolutely refuse to look at it while it's a work in progress. They just get the words down as an entire first draft. Do you have a person that is your editor? What is your process there?
Yeah, for grammar, I edit as I go. I mean, for me, I can't stand spelling mistakes. And I know as I'm writing, and thankfully the new Microsoft Word has a new grammar program that underlines things as soon as you write a sentence, that if there's something missing a comma or could be done differently, it will tell you and you can click on it and correct it right away. And I like to do that just because I don't want to have a daunting hill of things to fix when I get to the end of the book. And generally, as I'm writing as well, in terms of following the storyline, I usually am about halfway through the book when I have to go back through and in a notebook write down what happens in each chapter, so I don't leave an idea or put a thread in the story and then it gets lost and I don't follow up on it. So I have to go back at that point because my first two books jump sort of all over the place and there's lots of threads that are woven into the same story and I don't want to miss those. So that's basically the biggest part of my editing, I guess, is going back through and just making sure that I follow the storyline and I don't leave a big hole in the story that's going to be hard to fill. So I guess that's probably the biggest editing as I go. I don't have a professional editor. I mean, when you start out as a writer, you don't realize the costs involved with doing stuff like that. And professional editors generally charge $4,000 to $5,000 to go through and edit your novel. So I'm blessed with a couple of very detailed friends who read word for word instead of, when most people get into a novel and it's really piqued their interest and they go through it really quickly. These two people read word for word for word for word. So they're picking up where I should have written the word they, but I've written the word the. And people that are reading it quickly don't pick up on that. So that's been a big help for me. If I get to the point that there is hopefully, touch wood, some success with the writing, then obviously I'll hire an editor once I start making some money from the books.
It sounds like it's similar to anything that's close to your heart. It takes a village. So it sounds like you've got great support there. Like
I do, yeah.
Detailed oriented friends.
Yes.
For writing this, did you use other books as resources or did you do research as part of your process to write the waking hours?
I didn't really use books. I guess I probably took my strange ideas. I'm a big Dean Koontz fan. I always have been, and he's very, very strange storylines. So I think that's sort of what started the process of me thinking in terms of writing very weird stories. Um, but I will tell you, if anybody's looking at my Google search history, they're probably going to be concerned about me. Because when you write about serial killers, you have to know about different ways of murdering people. It sounds terrible, but it's true. And I had to research a lot about DNA and how it's extracted and how it's tested. And in the book that I'm writing now, I had to research a lot about how to process film and photographs in a darkroom, because that's really what the story is about. It's finding films with pictures of women who have been killed, and she takes the first one to the Walmart to develop and has a horrible reaction from the cashier, and has to learn how to develop the rest of the films in the darkroom. So Google's been a great tool for me, and not really books necessarily, but yeah, I mean, you have to do research in anything you do, and it is fiction, but there has to be an authenticity to it, or it's not worth reading.
Absolutely, yeah. And so this was a self-published book. Can you tell us all a little bit about your process? How did you get from writing in your writing room to getting a book on Amazon?
Well, that's an interesting story, and that has a lot to do with my friend Neil, who is my Zoom mentor every Monday. When I finished writing The Waking Hours, I have always, it's that romantic notion that you want to publish traditionally and find an agent and get one of the big publishing houses excited and have all the hoopla around the marketing. And I did try that. I pounded the pavement for a very long time and queried. And it's really, it's a really tough business. I mean, there are so many people writing books, and so few agents that are looking for anything that's not specifically what they want. And their vision has become quite myopic in what they're looking for. It's all minority characters and LGBTQ. And so the people that are writing traditional fiction, not including any of that stuff, kind of fall off the radar. So I gave up querying for a while. Last summer, I was chatting with one of our guests at Shamrock Lodge, and she knew I had written this book. And as I'm chatting with her, Neil and his family are behind me at another table overhearing this conversation. And when I'd finished, he said, "Tell me about your book. I want to read it." So I emailed him a copy. And as it turns out, a good friend of his works acquiring digital content for places like Netflix and HBO. And Neil had told him about my story and said, "Look, it's nothing I've ever seen or read before. It's really different. It's really good." So I had a Zoom call with Dan, and he said, "Look, if you're serious about getting this out and, potentially pitching this to TV studios, you need to get your book published and you need to get some traction." So the immediate fire was lit under me to go and get it self-published on Amazon. So it's a big learning curve, which unfortunately I did backwards. I think started at the finish line when the gun went off, and I did everything the wrong way, but it ended up getting it done and getting it self-published on January the 11th, and the reaction's been great. So that was kind of the cause behind the self-publishing, and just seeing what the reaction was, and it's been great. So,
well, congrats again. It's really amazing to know that you wrote a book and it's out there in the world. It's a living, breathing thing, reaching people that you don't even know, I'm sure. So now
I'm starting. It's nice because now I've gone from. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I think we've got a bit of a delay. I was just going to say we're going to launch into some specifics now from the book. So Susan did give me the go-ahead. There may be spoilers in questions or answers that she says. Hopefully you've all read the book or are prepared to hear those if you have not. So The Waking Hours is the first in the relative series and is told from multiple points of view. Did you find it easier to fully develop each character by allowing them each to have their own voice and opportunity to express themselves? Was that a conscious choice to do the multiple points of view?
Yeah, it was, because I found that because they were sort of talking to me and telling me their story, they all spoke in very different voices, which I thought was great. I mean, it's not me trying to explain characters and give them human qualities. It was those characters speaking to me in their voice and in their language. So when you read it, you'll understand that, you know, Charlotte's voice and how she speaks and how she thinks are very different from Gunner's voice and Jack's voice. So they all have very individual personality traits that you sort of pick up through those points of view.
Did they come to you? They came with their voices. Do they come with their names?
They do now. It's funny because the initial 3 chapters that I did, Jack's name was Ethan and Charlotte's name was Emily. And when I picked it up again in 2015, those names just didn't resonate with me anymore. And I did kind of come up with when they're hearing the voices whispered, the nickname Charlie, that her voice or her name had to be Charlotte. I mean, Emily didn't make sense, and I couldn't figure out how the nickname would come in. So Jack became Jack and Charlotte became Charlotte. Gunner was always Gunner because he's very headstrong, and he just said, "This is my name." And I said, okay. So we figured it out.
Now, Jack Brandon, he has a compulsive need to perform his tasks in groups of 3. How did this personality quirk of his come to play a part in your plot development?
And again, I think I try to think back to the beginning, because that was 20 years ago when that storyline came up. And I don't know if it was me wanting to put something into the book where it was easy for him to leave behind clues at the murder scenes in 3s, and that OCD quality kind of worked into itself, or if initially he was saying, hey, I've got this quirk and figure out how to write it. So I can't remember how that all came to be, but it ended up working out really well in the end, that it was a good blend of his quirk kind of coming through in his dreams and being able to leave clues at the crime scenes.
Yeah, it kept me guessing the whole time. I actually thought when they found the bit under his fingernail that was it. He was done.
Yeah.
And Gunner, you said he came to you, he's very headstrong. That was one of my questions about him as the police officer. Did you base him on anyone in particular? He's quite gruff, he's a terrible neighbor. He's a bit hard to like, even though he's one of the good guys. Can you discuss your decision to include such a disagreeable character in such a key role on the good side?
Yeah, I think for me, it kind of goes back to what I like to read. I mean, that for me, I need to have a character that I can really, really like, and then a character that I'm either not really sure about, or I know I don't want to like, but I kind of like him anyway. So he starts out as his gruffness, and he's had a tough life as a cop. He's seen lots of terrible things, but the thing I think about him is that he really he mellows, he softens, and that kind of, it's nice to be able to play with that character and take somebody from that really tough exterior and make him human again. I mean, he's, now he's met these people that need his help, and he's become quite involved with, so he really does become a likable guy, and he's taken a big part he was in book number 2 a little bit, not as much, but he's taken on a bigger role in book number 3. And I think, when you get to Darkroom and you think, oh, it's Gunner, you'll like him a lot better. He's really become a nice guy. He's kind of mellowed in his old age, so we say.
I didn't dislike him, but he was hard to like. Yeah. He certainly had his likable qualities, but yeah, I wouldn't want to live beside him for sure. And then the most lovable character, I think, is Norman the dog. He added a whole other level to your story. He seemed to know Charlotte's tragic past, as well as the mysterious connection between Jack and Victor's murder victims. How did you know that including a prescient dog was the right move as a writer? Because that could have just come off as really cliche, but it didn't. Norman was great.
Yeah, I think because Norman ended up being really one of the major characters in the story. So it wasn't a weird addition of let's just throw in a dog and see what happens. I mean, he was really the glue that kind of held everything together. He was the character that brought Charlotte and Jack together. And I didn't want to specifically write in the book that Norman was being basically guided by Max's spirit. And some people pick up on that and some people don't. And I mean, I'm a dog person. I always have been. And for me, it made sense to have a dog in the book. And that's the one thing that Neil and I disagreed on is he said, I don't know why you had to have a dog in the book. But to me, Norman was that sort of relief of we've gone from horrendous murders and, Charlotte's being stalked by this guy and all this stuff's going on. And then, you have comical moments with this dog and probably one of the favorite scenes that I wrote is when it's close to the end of the book when Norman's riding in Gunner's car and they're going to Victor's warehouse. And he turns on the sirens and the lights and Norman's so excited that he's jumping up and down on the front seat of the car because he's just, he's a police dog now and involved in the chase. So, I mean, for me, I mean, he's just a big part of the book for me. And I can't imagine having the same story work out as well as it did without having Norman.
I agree. He was great. Now on the cover of the book, we notice, my kids noticed straight away when I first brought it home that there's two different eye colors. And is that a personal significance to you? That was quite a unique feature to have, or did it become that way for the main characters to identify each other? Because it kind of acts as as a message board or as a code at different times, these two different eye colors. How did that come to be?
Well, and I really, again, it's one of those things that I don't know if I specifically thought about it ahead of time, but I like the fact that when it's easy to see. I mean, it makes a big statement when it's coming from Victor's looking at the murder victim and suddenly the two brown eyes now are blue and green. And when Charlotte's visiting her grandmother and she's taking blue and green hydrangeas and Max's eyes were the same blue and green. So I think just the tie-in of all that stuff made sense to me to do it that way. And when I was writing it, I honestly, because of all of the potential to do really cool effects in a movie, that having that hologram face with the two different colored eyes coming through this murder victim would be really neat. So I think in the back of my head, I was kind of writing it as this could be a movie because I think it would be a great movie. I mean, that's, there's so many things that they could do with special effects and stuff like that. So didn't really have a personal significance. I mean, ironically, my father had different colored eyelashes, not eye color, but one of his eyelashes was almost blonde and the other eye was dark. So it maybe had something to do with maybe pulling that in, but I don't think I consciously wrote it that way.
So I've been dying to know who is on the cover of the book. Is it Jack? Is it Max?
It is Jack. Max was 16 when he died, so he wouldn't have looked as devilishly handsome as Jack does. But yeah, and it's, in choosing the cover, that's one of the important things too, is when people are putting a book out there is to make sure that your cover is going to grab people's attention. I mean, that's the first thing people do when they pick up a book is look at the cover. And if it's not something that's going to grab you and make you think, I want to see what this book's about. So when I was talking to the artist and giving her my ideas, we went through about probably 6 or 7 different variations of what the book looked like. But when she came out with that, and you could sort of see it was a little bit blurred and there's a slight hologram look to his face, I just thought that's exactly what I want it to be. So it's perfect.
How did you find the book cover author?
There's a website called Fiverr.com, and it's all graphic artists who do everything, really. I mean, they'll do voiceovers, they do book covers, and I just happened to click on one of the artists, and she was great. She's done the design for the second book cover. She's working on the other 4 in the series. So yeah, it's going to be interesting because all of the books now are going to sort of have that face with a little bit of a different edge to it to give you an idea what the book's about.
Well, I can't wait to see the next one.
It's very exciting.
Charlotte, she's a very strong female character. I really loved how you wrote her, but she still ends up becoming a victim. I could really relate to the way that you described her fear when she walked through the park and the way her instincts were telling her to take a different way home. I think that this is an experience that sadly is quite familiar to many women, and it felt very true to form in the book and the way that you wrote it. Did writing about a serial killer affect the way that you view the world and the people around you?
Oh, that's a good question. And it's, you know, I work in hospitality, so I see a lot of more good in people than other, but there are, you know, I've met some people through my work in the industry that certainly have been bad people, and you kind of take all of those characteristics, and as a writer, I mean, I've always stored those little bits of people, and the next book I've written is actually about a child that I met at the lodge a couple of years ago, and it was scary. I mean, you know, he was a scary kid, and for me that really resonated, and it's all of taking these little pieces of people and putting them into characters to make them interesting enough that you can like them or not like them. But I don't know if it's really affected the way I write about them. I mean, Charlotte, I loved writing because she, at the beginning, seemed like this timid woman, and at the end, basically stared down the man that was potentially going to take her life, and was completely, you know, a different person at the end of the book, which I love. And I've continued writing her. So she, in the book I'm currently writing, is, you know, she's more of a powerhouse now. She's just taken control of her life, and you know, that timidness is still there because everybody has to have it. I mean, men, women, everybody in society has to have that I need to be careful thing, but I'm also going to take charge of my life. So
you mentioned a couple of characters that we'll see throughout your relative series, and you have a total of 6 books lined up. Does the series follow any particular character that we've already met? What's the common thread that holds all the books together to make it the series?
well, it's when I first wrote The Waking Hours, it was not intended to be in the relative series. It was intended to be in a series of books that were very similar to the Prey series, and I'm going to blank out on the author's name, and I feel so bad. But it was going to be the hours. So the second book was going to be the prison hours. The third book was going to be the lost hours. And then that just didn't make sense. So I had 4 other ideas for books. And when I sat down with Neil, he said, well, can we figure out a way to have these all connect? So he came back for a second week to stay at the lodge in August. And we sat down every afternoon and talked about how we can have them connect. And the story that I had for the book I'm writing now had nothing to do with anybody in the first book, but now it's completely about 2 of the people in the first book, which is why it became the relative series. So it turns out that the connective thread is, and I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but it is going to be about a generational family of serial killers. And it was kind of surprising the way it all came about, but it's very cool. And at the end of the week, Neil said, okay, well, if you've seen Netflix and watched the American Horror Story series, the American Horror Story is kind of a blanket title for all of the series that they have, and they're not necessarily related, which is basically what I've written. You don't need to read book number 1 to like and understand the characters in book number 2, but then you realize, oh, okay, well, that's so-and-so from the first book, and that's so-and-so, and then they kind of travel through. So there will be connective tissue through all 6 books that end up going 2 generations back to basically the start of the family who are serial killers.
So that maybe answers my next question. which is regarding how it's called the relative series. Is it relative as in it is relatives?
Yes, yeah, and that was one of my tasks when Neil, because he kind of gave me homework every night when I went home after our chats and said, okay, come back tomorrow, tell me how Darkroom can fit in with this, and tell me how Root Cellar can fit in. And that was one of the tasks. He said, if we're going to set this up to be like a Netflix series, you need to have that blanket name and go home and come up with something, because he kept thinking it would be related to a spider web or some sort of, woven. And I'm not even kidding you. I walked in my door in my house, and 2 minutes later, I just said, it's all relative. So I went back to work the next day and said, Neil, it's all relative. He said, the relative series. And it just happened to be that it combined everything that we were trying to do. So
what a gift to have him in your ear, helping you with all of your problem solving.
He's been my genius. He is, and for him to take, an hour out of his busy schedule every Monday to have a meeting with me, he's already calling himself my producer. So if we do get to, a TV series, we're both covered. But yeah, no, he's been amazing.
You've mentioned TV series a few times. Is that something that you're working towards? Obviously, that would be something that you would hope for, but is that something that is in the pipeline in any way?
I think it's at the entrance of the pipeline. It was one of the things, that was Neil's first thought, was that all of these ideas would make a really great Netflix series, because he watches Netflix all the time. And, it's not something he's ever seen before. You can watch something about serial killers, but who wakes up in somebody else's body and is killed, but has the physical signs of how it happened. And book number 2 deals with time travel. And it's just all really cool stuff that would make a great TV series. So I think that's our goal that we're working towards. And hence the fact, get the books out there, get them, people talking about them. And there have been a lot of comments on Amazon, and thank you all to the people who have left reviews that they could see it as a TV show or a movie. So that's been very, very promising.
Wow. I look forward to seeing how that evolves.
Yes, me too.
So the ending tied up many of the loose ends, but the reader's still left with a lot of unanswered questions. Will you be revealing the answer or the explanation of how Jack came to be entangled with Victor's murders? Or is that just something we have to kind of think about forever?
My intention is to unravel that bit of the mystery. Jack has not appeared in book 2 or 3. He was mentioned in book 3, but there is a very strong potential for him to appear in one of the later books and uncover the mystery of why that happened in the waking hours.
So do you already know the answer, or is it one of those things that's still evolving with the voices in your head?
Yeah, it's evolving. I have no idea. I have, you can't see my background, but I have 3 working whiteboards in my living room. And every time I have an idea, something gets added to the whiteboard. So he's on there. I just don't know if that's the way he's going to stay on the board or if that's going to change. But I do have every intention of bringing him back at some point. I just don't know how right now.
Okay, fair enough. I'm just going to remind everyone, if they have questions for you, to just type them in the chat box. I see Abby has done that. Thank you, Abby. We have a few more questions in the formal format for Susan, and then we're opening it up a bit to the floor. So just type them down there for Susan in a few minutes time. You just mentioned your whiteboard, Susan. I don't know how movable your camera is, or yet you. Do you want to just give us a little sneak peek, or is it top secret stuff?
No, I can, hold on one second. Hopefully I don't drop anybody.
Put you on the spot there.
Yeah. I don't know if you can see those. Where are we going here?
Oh yeah.
So it's got a couple different boards. So one of the boards has the 4 books in progress. One of them is the book I'm specifically working on now. And the other one is specifically timeline, which when we decided to put all the books together as a series became a big deal because as I was writing book number 2, I didn't know if the years were meshing with different characters and how it was all going to play out. And at one point I almost had a complete meltdown because I thought I had written myself basically out of the series, but thankfully it all worked out. So I've got timelines going back to 1894 when the grandfather of the serial killing family was born, and thankfully as it kind of trickled down it all worked out and I didn't have to worry. So that part was a big stress relief for me.
I imagine going back that far, there's quite a bit of research. You were speaking about it earlier, just keeping really accurate to certain details. As you go back in time, you probably need to stay true to food and clothing and transportation. And do you find that challenging, or is it exciting to get right into the nitty gritty?
It will be exciting. Thankfully, the ones that I'm working on now are still current time, so I haven't had to deal with as much of that, but I'm referencing slight bits to going back into that, 1894 time era and making sure that it's going to be an authentic transition from one book to the other. And it's interesting because the book that I'm currently working on references a lot of old novels. I mean, Clay's library is just full of old novels that he uses to hide films of women, like film canisters of pictures of women that he has killed, and they're all very specific names, and the names actually weave into a message that he's leaving that leads back to his father. So it's interesting to try and tie all that stuff in and make sure that you keep it true and it doesn't sound like you're pushing the idea. So it's hopefully I'm doing it justice.
I'm surprised you don't have more than 3 whiteboards. That is a lot to keep track of.
Yeah, I have lots of notes in my phone and notebooks everywhere, and yeah, it's a lot of stuff.
So all the voices in your head talking to you at all times, do you get a break when you go to sleep, or do you also dream?
Oh no, I think I probably based Jack's character on myself because I have really, really vivid dreams that I'm one of those people that can remember 90% of them when I wake up, and they're vivid dreams. I dream in color. And recently it's kind of strange that I've been, wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and think about the dream and then still think about the dream. And as I'm falling back into sleep, the dream is still there and I end up going back into the same dream, which is very strange. So I'm most of the times, thankfully, it's a good dream. So
Unlike Jack.
yes, I don't have bruises on my forehead. I don't wake up with rashes, nothing. So
do you believe in reincarnation?
I do. Yeah, I have always, for me, there's 2 reasons really that I do. And I think one of them is deja vu and explaining the feeling that you've met somebody before, but you've never met them. And I think the other big thing for me, it kind of in my brain explains the child prodigy. If you meet a 5-year-old that's a beautiful pianist and can play concertos and never really having that many lessons, reincarnation for me would explain how that's possible.
That's sort of how I took Norman's character. There was some element there that came through from Max, but I wasn't sure if that was the end of the story. Lorna answered earlier on, you couldn't remember the author for the Prey series. She said John Sanford. So
thank you, Sanford. I knew it was John and I couldn't think of his name.
Very quick off the hop, true librarian.
Excellent.
Do you have any time to read? And if so, what are you currently reading?
I do actually. I set aside time to read because being a writer, you always have to make yourself better. And I think reading other people always makes you better and gives you things to either strive towards or compare yourself to. And there's always the comfort level for me if I get, like today, that 50 word this morning writing block, is to go back into my comfort zone and read Dean Koontz. And I've probably read every one of his books at least 3 times each. But I'm back into Cold Fire because I like the way his brain works, and it makes my thought process kind of get reinvigorated to where it should be again. So
this genre is not what I would normally seek out. I don't like people following me in my thoughts. I don't like having to worry about the lights going off and taking a walk at night. But I did appreciate that you were able to work in that element of psychological thriller without, and a lot of death is happening, but it's
yes.
not gory. We're not inundated with all of these details that are hard to stomach, even though the dying itself is challenging enough. I congratulate you on doing just enough of the details to make it really horrid without it being horrific, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. I went a little, I think, over the top with the roller coaster scene, but it had to be done because it had to be, you know, a big moment. So other than that, it was okay.
And it must be a very large city that a lot of people died in a short space of time. Victor was killing a lot of people. Does it make you worry to go into cities?
You know, I don't like cities to begin with, so I don't have to worry about that. The pandemic has worked really well for me, making me stay in my tiny little house in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, I'm always panicked of cities. So maybe that's kind of a big part of that writing process as well, is being comfortable to say, yeah, this could happen, and it's fiction, but maybe it's not.
Well, I think there's a little bit of that in all of this, and I think that's what your good writing has shown us, that, you know, Gunnar was complicated and not likable, but likable somehow. And there were times, I think one of your reviews on Amazon said there were times that you're rooting in a really weird way for Victor, which makes no sense because you know who he is, and yet there's moments where you write his character where he's human. In his mind, he's justified his work. It's a job, and he's doing it really well. And he's eliminating people that for some reason are deemed to be eliminated. And yeah, you made your characters quite dimensional, multi-dimensional, and it was easy to read through and connect with them all. So I'm happy to hear that they're going to show up in some form in some of the books.
Yes, I appreciate that. Thank you. And there's probably in book number 4, you'll have a moment where you kind of feel sorry for Victor, because it does go back into his past a little bit and kind of tells you how he is defined as who he is now. So.
Well, I see we do have a question from Abby. So I don't know how deep you want to get into this, and we touched on it a little bit, but she's wondering, what is the phenomenon that allowed Jack to see the murders? Has he always had premonitions, or will he still after these events? It finishes, he's quite happy in life. Is he sleeping well?
Well, yeah. So at the end, I mean, he was starting to sleep well because he and Charlotte had forged a relationship and moved in together. And I think when it gets to the point later in the book series, again, I mean, you had touched on it a bit earlier as well. I haven't seen that far into where Jack's going to end up going, or even if he's going to come back. I mean, I kind of think he's going to come back, but I could get to the point where he just doesn't, and that story kind of sits as it is. So at this point, I don't really know where he's going to end up being as a character, and how it's going to get explained. I mean, it just, you know, that first book idea was just like, oh, this is a great idea. But then it kind of took off into this, now I'm writing a 6-book series, and how do I pull that back in? So it probably will end up in there at some point. I'm just not sure how.
Fair enough. Kathy is asking, are any of the characters based upon people from your personal life in any way?
Yes and no. I mean, not the full character themselves, but there are, and it's fun to write because when I read it back, I know what's in there, but there are, you know, quirks from people I know, or sayings that they like. There's a moment in when Gunnar's putting his coffee into the microwave, and, you know, microwaves take 10 seconds to heat up a coffee, but he's so impatient, he pushes the button, yells, "Come on!" And that's actually based on a friend of mine who used to work with a guy who did that at his office. And when he told me that story, I thought it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. So that part became Gunner's part of his character. And there are lots of little things. And this is going to sound kind of strange, but when Charlotte's grandmother passes away and the nurses have come in and found her on the floor, kind of all wrapped up in this nest of blankets, that's how they found my mom when she passed away. So I wanted to put that little bit of my mom into the book and kind of have that be a special moment for me to remember it in a nicer way than I have. So that was kind of a strange addition. I mean, I hadn't written it in the first place, and somehow it got changed and ended up in there.
That must have been really difficult to add, although a beautiful permanent tribute to her. Was that a recognizable part to any of your family members who read your book?
Yes, my brother did get that, and my nephews, and yeah, so it's a good family moment for us to have it be kind of memorialized and something that takes on a bit of a brighter light than the way we all remember it. So
yeah. Are there parts of writing that you really enjoy more than others that perhaps need to be done but feel more like a chore? I am not a writer, so off the top of my head is dialogue particularly challenging, but character development is easy. And anything that you look forward to getting to that part of the process in particular?
yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I don't write a lot of dialogue. Not that I don't enjoy it, because for me it's coming from the character's point of view, so it's them speaking. It's not me forcing them to say something. But I did run into somebody who had read the book, and she said, "Oh, I realize you don't write a lot of dialogue." And I thought it was going to be a negative. And she said, "But then I realized you're a storyteller, and it didn't matter to me." And I do like the descriptive part of writing better than I like writing dialogue. It's just easier for me to, describe the sun setting than it is for me to come up with a full conversation, because I like to describe what's going on instead of having the character tell you what's going on.
Makes sense. Before we finish up, I just see the time. We have about 6 minutes left. Can you tell us a bit about your next book, which is very soon to hit the shelves, the virtual shelves of Amazon, and hopefully locally available again at Foodland?
Yes, thankfully I've had some very, very supportive local people, the pharmacy, the Foodland, Fresh Mart Bala, Glen Orchard Store, the Shell Station, the Town and Country. So yeah, it's been great having locals be able to access who don't, either like Amazon or shop on Amazon. So that's been really helpful. So 111 is the next book in the series, and it's coming out on May the 2nd, which I'm a big believer in numbers and signs. So it's 111 days after Waking Hours came out. And it is, again, story about a serial killer. And again, I think I mentioned that I had met a child at the lodge a couple of years ago who was a very strange little boy and scared me. He was 8 years old. And as soon as I met him, I thought, he's going to be the next character in my book. So it turns out that this little boy in 111 starts out by killing small animals, which is generally the way serial killers start their pattern. But Shane and Holly study serial killers. He's fascinated by them and starts studying the local Toronto latest serial killer. And it turns out that this little boy he had known as a child is this serial killer in Toronto. So he starts traveling through time inexplicably and ending up in places where he starts to gather information, because everywhere he goes is into this little boy's life, and pieces it all together, and finally goes to the police and says, I think this is our killer. And so yeah, it takes a really, again, strange sort of turn into the world of strange combined with another serial killer.
There's been a couple more questions come from the audience. Abby would like to know if Norman could have actually been a cat.
I'm not surprised by that question, and potentially there might be a cat coming up I might put a cat in for Abby in another book.
She says yay. And Kathy would like to know, are you going to get rich on the royalties?
The way it's going, well, I shouldn't say that. The way it's going now, I should be completely happy, and I am completely happy. When I initially Googled self-publishing a novel, Google said to expect to sell 250 copies in the first year and 1,000 books in its lifetime. And I've already sold just shy of 500 in the first 2 months. So not retiring yet, but it's a good start. And the fact that I've got another book coming out in May is great. So no retiring at the moment. Maybe if Netflix happens to call me and say, let's talk, then there could be a retirement plan in progress.
Do you know how many libraries have your book?
Currently, I believe that you are the only one.
And that's because we knew about you. So I don't know that side of getting your books out into the world that way, but hopefully other librarians can request it and get it on their shelves, because it's another way of accessing people.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the toughest part about self-publishing is the marketing. So I mean, it's, pounding the pavement and sending out press releases and calling radio stations. And I just did Hunter's Bay interview last Sunday. I've sent a copy of the book to Sheila Rogers at CBC. So maybe something will come of that. But yeah, that's the worst part, is just getting your name out there and getting, people to buy the book. So every little bit counts.
And how does it work? So Amazon's your biggest platform right now. It's the biggest platform probably in the world. And are you linked onto Goodreads as well? Is there any way that we can help get the word out as members of the public and of your own community? Reviews you've mentioned have really helped bump the book come up in recommendations. Is that how the whole system works?
It is, yeah. I mean, Amazon is big on reviews. If you get over a certain number, they'll feature the book. And I mean, that's been going well. Goodreads is going to be probably one of the better marketing tools for me. I have just done a 2-week-long giveaway, so you can win a chance to get one of 10 signed copies and have 1,200 people signed up. So, I mean, that's 1,200 people that wouldn't have known about my book had they not seen it on a giveaway. So Goodreads is a big deal. And yeah, reviews are essential. So, I mean, if anybody's read the book, even if you're not on Amazon, if you've bought it at the Foodland or where you picked it up, then you can go onto Goodreads and leave a review regardless of where you purchased it.
Fabulous. Okay, well, hopefully everyone will do that. Lorna has once again put the link in the chat box, which is only available for about another minute, because as soon as we end the meeting, it'll disappear. So click on it now. It takes you to Susan's blog. If you're not familiar with her blog, she has been doing that since 2012, called Polysyllabic Profundities, which we did have a laugh about before we went live. It's a little bit of a tongue twister, but do you get any time to add to that, Susan? How frequently are you popping over there? And I'm sure it's quite a different writing outlet. As our final thought from you before we sign off.
Yeah, I miss it actually, because it's the random. I can write about anything, and I have been so busy writing the books that I haven't made time. And the joke was at the beginning of this, before we went live, I can't pronounce it myself sometimes. But yeah, it's a good outlet for me, because I can write about whatever I want to write about, and it's been really helpful for me to get through a lot of stuff that's happened over the last 12 years. So I do intend to keep it up. It's probably more book related and just announcing stuff than anything else for the past couple of posts. But yeah, it'll still be going for hopefully a long time.
That's okay. That's all relative.
There you go. Wow, well done.
Well, thank you. Our time is up. That went really quickly. I wasn't sure how it would go, if an hour would be seeming like we didn't have enough questions, but I've got more and we didn't get to them. So thank you to everyone, especially you, Susan, for taking the time to be with us tonight. And once again, congratulations on seeing your hard work out in the world in print form. Keep an eye on your inbox, everyone, as well as our library website, our social media accounts for future events like tonight. Thank you again, and good night.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you being here, and thank you for the library and allowing me this time to do this. This has been great.